This week we're going to be doing a few different jobs. Today we're starting off with a fix, and by the end of the week we're going to be framing. And the one thing we're looking at all week is DeWalt tools. Throughout all the jobs we end up doing, I'm just going to be using as many DeWalt tools as possible. I want to be talking about the tools, how they go, and on top of that I'm still going to talk you through everything we do and everything we build throughout this week. Now I like doing fixes, but the type of job we're doing today is something I typically try to avoid. And we'll get to that in a second, but for now what I'm doing is going through and marking all the door jambs for the boys to cut. We're using easy jam doors, so as you can see the hinges and the latches are already pre-installed in the jambs in the doors. So what I'm doing is lining up the door jambs with the doors. I'm just going to trace where the door finishes for the top and the bottom, and then the boys are going to grab the jambs and cut them to the size that we need. Before I start installing these doors, I'm also going to run around and just measure all the windows and write down the measurements for the architrave. Now the way we do fixes is that there'll be one person on the saw cutting everything all day, and another person on the gun shooting up the door, shooting the arcs. And obviously to start the day, there's nothing cut ready to go, so whoever's on the saw has a lot more to do to start with. Now since I'm going to be the one shooting everything up, I'll spend the morning going through, marking the windows, marking the doors, giving the person on the saw enough time to make a start so that when I do jump over onto the gun, I'm not going to have to wait for them. Alright, so we're going to make a start, and the first tool we're going to be using is this DeWalt fixer. Typically on a fix, I will be running an air hose and using a pneumatic gun, but for the sake of this video, I do want to make a start with this fixer and see how it goes. So the way I hang all my doors is firstly I've gone through and plumbed up the stud on the hinge side. The frame opening was actually a bit out of plumb, so you can see I've got a few packers at the bottom and it goes through to nothing at the top. From there I'm just going to tack on the jam to the stud. I'm going to shoot where the packers are to make sure that it is plumb. And now that I've got my jam roughly in place, I can go through and install the door. And this is super easy. We've already got the hinges installed to the jam and the door. All I need to do is line up the hinges with each other and drop the pin in to lock it in place. I had a bit of a struggle trying to position where this door should go. From this angle you can see the door's closest to the left, and because of that we need to rip one side of the architrave. It would have looked so much better if we did push the door slightly to the right so we could get a full architrave on both sides, but the reason I put the door where it is to center it with the door next to it on the other side of the wall. To cut these architraves though, we are going to use the second DeWalt tool of the day. This is DeWalt's 184mm 18V circular saw, and today I'm going to be using this saw as well as DeWalt's 54V circular saw. I've got access to both of them today, and it's going to be perfect to jump back and forth between them and get a good feel and review from both of those saws. Now I tried using the DeWalt fixer, but I had to switch over to the pneumatic one pretty quickly. The DeWalt fixer is awesome, I've used it a lot, and it's definitely great for odd jobs if you don't want to set up a compressor and run out of hose. If I'm going to be doing a fix all day, I definitely want to be using air. Now there's a few reasons for that. Firstly, using the air gun, I can shoot nails automatically. With the DeWalt fixer, you can kind of hear it. I need to hold my finger on the trigger and it needs to wind up for a second before shooting. Secondly, the nail holes are smaller using this gun, so the painters are going to love us a little bit more. And lastly, I feel like you get a bit more power from the pneumatic gun as well. I've had times using the battery fixer where the nails haven't shot in all the way, and I've never had that problem using an air hose. Also with the DeWalt gun, it did start to struggle if I wasn't holding pressure on the magazine. That's definitely just a service issue. I do need to take it apart and service a gun, but ultimately the gun isn't what you'd be using if you're doing a fix for the entire day. Alright, so I'm going to explain what I'm doing and the process I'm doing to hang this door. So up to this point, all I've done is chucked a couple packers on the hinge side of the door to make sure the door is plumb, and I'm shooting this architrave onto the door jam. From there, I can use the architrave to move the door jam and make sure that we have a 3mm gap all the way around the door. Obviously I started with the top, I made sure that was perfect to start with, and once I get that 3mm quirk around the door jam, that architrave should be plumb, which I'm going to double check with the level anyway, and then I can shoot the architrave into the stud, holding that door jam in place. So I'll do this all the way around the door. Make sure we have that consistent 3mm gap around the door, make sure everything's plumb and level, and at this point we've only done the architraves on one side, so I can jump into the other side of the room and then start to slide in all my packers between the door jam and the frame. And these packers are going to secure the door jam in place, and once they're all in, I can do the architrave on the other side of the door. Now at the start of the video, I did say that this is a type of job I typically try to avoid. And I'm not talking about fixes in general, it's more the style and the type of house that we're working on. To address the problem, firstly we'll start with Australia's housing market. If you're an Aussie, you know how hard it is to buy a house. Prices are getting crazy, And to combat that, obviously there's a lot of builders who are trying to build houses for as cheap as possible so people have a place to live. What happens when you're trying to build a house as cheap as possible though, is every single trade comes through and they're still doing their work. There's obviously inspectors coming over and hopefully checking over all the work, making sure it's to standard. But there's just not as much care put into the work, meaning that when we get to the final stages of the house, there's a lot of eyesores and a lot of things that I would do differently. Now, firstly, in almost every door we've installed, the stud openings haven't been centered in the doorway. Even looking at this one here, I'd always try to do a double stud coming off a wall just so we can get a full architrave against the plasterboard. Just little things like that look a lot neater in a finished house. Another thing I love doing is going through all my door jambs and pre-drilling holes and screwing them into the stud as well. It's just small things like this that help the house last even longer. Obviously everything we are doing is still by the book, it's still going to last, but it's just all these 1%ers and extra quality work that I love doing. Now, I always prefer doing high quality work and doing jobs where we do have the time to make sure things are done right. And especially while making videos, I love to show off the best way to do things. But doing a job like this is a bit more of a realistic look into the way a lot of houses are built. A lot of houses are built on very tight margins and all the trades have to go in and get out and rush through the work just to be able to get paid. Since we do need to rip this architrave down, I'm going to use it as a perfect time to try DeWalt's 54 volt saw. And this thing is a beast. It flies through the rip.
Alright, so today we're going to flip between DeWalt's 54 volt and the 18 volt. These are both the 185mm saw blades, so they are almost exactly the same in their size and their weight. The only difference is obviously that extra voltage in the 54 volt. This saw is the reason I changed over to DeWalt. At the time the 54 volt batteries came out, DeWalt was unmatched. Makita didn't have 40 volt, Hikoki didn't have the 36 volt. The power you got out of these saws is what made me stop using corded saws and jumped over to battery saws. Still to this day, these saws are one of the most powerful cordless saws on the market. I love it, I'm so used to it, everything about the saw feels great, feels right. I think that's an awesome saw. In terms of the 18 volt saw, the boys just stole it. They're still working and I couldn't hog both of the saws at the same time. But for an 18 volt tool, I think it's really good. Firstly, it's got the same build as this saw, which I'm used to. I think it's a really good build. Easy to hold, easy to see where the blade's cutting. I like the 18 volt saw for what it is, but personally when I'm using 18 volt tools, I prefer the smaller 165mm blade. Just because the 18 volt saw isn't going to give you as much power as these, I'd rather it be a lighter, smaller saw that I can carry with me on the roof and into awkward spots.
For the rest of the day, we just ran around and finished off the fix. Did all the arcs around the windows, installed all the skirting boards. There were a few arcs that we had to put on and the walls had massive bows in them, so that was good. It actually let us pull out the DeWalt planer and we had to plane the backs of some of these arcs to make them work. I did have to borrow this planer. I used to have a DeWalt planer and I accidentally hit insulation with it and the planer basically exploded. Which is a shame because I think DeWalt do make a really good, easy to use battery planer. And as part of the fix, it's our job to go through and sand over all the miters. So this is perfect. We get to pull out DeWalt's orbital sander and have a go using it.
I'm going to keep sanding, but I want to try the multi-tool and try this with the sanding attachment. So the sander did really well. In terms of vibration, I'll probably give it a 3 or 4 out of 10. It wasn't too much vibration, but after a few of those arcs, you start to feel it in your arm. I'm just unboxing this oscillating tool for the first time. And these are the sanding pads I have. I've never seen anything like that before. I'll chuck a 120 grit onto these and we'll see how it goes. So there's definitely a bit more vibration in the multi-tool over the sander. It's not too bad though. I gave the sander a 3 or a 4 out of 10. I'll probably give this a 5 out of 10. It's not too bad. The best thing about this though is obviously the shape of the sanding attachment. It means this is perfect for going through and sanding our architraves hard up against the wall. With the rounded pads on the orbital sander, you can't do that as neatly.
Anyway, that's all the work done for day one, and two DeWalt tools that were being used all day that I personally didn't use and didn't get any content on was this DeWalt miter saw, and it's got a really nice custom base plate there. And the other tool that was being used was the jigsaw, and the jigsaw was being used instead of a coping saw to cut all of the skirts in internal corners. We're at a new job today, doing a fix again, and straight off the bat we're getting two more new DeWalt tools out. I've got two torches here and we're definitely going to need them in some of these rooms with how dark it does get. Now this job's going to be quite unique for two different reasons. Firstly, as you can see, the door is already installed, and that's the case throughout this entire triple story house. The guys came last week and they installed all the doors, but none of the material came to do any of the arcs or any of the skirts. And that's going to be the main focus on today. And to start with, I thought this was going to be a pretty cruisy day, until I found out that all the plaster used is 13mm plaster, and all the door jambs are 110mm, which means for every door and window in this job, the plaster's sticking out further than the jamb. Now for the most part, the builder was happy if the arcs had a slight roll on them, so I'm going to do what I did just there. I hit back the corner of the plaster that's going to be behind the architrave, and that limits how much of an angle the architrave's going on, and it's going to look pretty good. You won't notice it when it's done. Unfortunately though, there are a few walls where there were ply bracing or a few other things going on where the plaster stack out way too much. And this is exactly what we're talking about. The plasterboard's sticking past close to 10mm here, and the worst part is that it's sticking past on one side of the door, and the other side of the door it is almost flush. So whoever went through and did the straightening here didn't do the best job, but it's done now and we're going to have to deal with what we got. The only way I think we can make this work is by getting an architrave, and we're just going to have to go through the back and plane out a lot of it. Planing the side architrave won't be too bad, it's going to be consistent mostly the entire way. When we do the architrave at the top though, we're going to have to plane it close to 10mm to nothing, and then for the skirting board that bouts into the architrave, we're going to have to do the same thing and plane the skirting board so it's the same thickness as the architrave at the bottom. On top of that, I'm going to do a few other things, like still rounding over the corner of the plaster, and this should hopefully limit me having to do 10mm, and maybe I can only plane back 8 or 7mm and limit how much we take out of this architrave. For taking the back of this architrave out, I am using the AEG planer. I did try to get my hands on a DeWalt planer again for today, but I couldn't do it, and as I said earlier, my DeWalt planer looks like it's never going to be used again. At least the AEG planer is a great tool, but we're still just trying to use DeWalt tools as much as possible for this week. I got away with taking out 5 to 6mm of the depth. Obviously I left the architrave at its full depth for when it's hitting the door jamb, so we have no gaps on that side. The 5 to 6mm we took out worked really well, in conjunction of also bending over the side of the plaster. So the architrave was perfect, and for the top I did that 5 to 6mm and faded it down to nothing as the top plaster is on a bit of an angle. Now when doing a fix, the normal process is to go through, hang all the doors, do all the architraves around the windows, and when they're all done, then you'll go through and do all the skirting. But for this case though, I'm just going to go through and install one bit of skirting, just so I can match the skirting board up with the new thickness of the architrave size. What I'm going to do is measure exactly what the architrave size is on one side of the skirting board, and just slowly go through the whole thing and gradually fade it out to be the full size again. For the most part, this day was pretty cruisy, just going through, doing the arcs over the doors and the windows. We smashed most of those out pretty quickly, but we had a few big problems that we had to deal with. The worst problem which I decided to fix is this window here, and you can see that jamb is just out of plumb. It's flush at the bottom and then sticking out 10mm past the plaster at the top. There's no point trying to plane back an architrave to get that to work. What I'm going to have to do is cut back this finished render and pull that whole window across. I don't know how this didn't get picked up before and how it got installed like that and no one came to fix it until the job was completely rendered. But the good thing about this though is that we're going to test out a few more DeWalt tools by cutting back this render. Now I'm firstly going to try DeWalt's smaller single-handed 18V recip. This tool was definitely made for working in tight locations. It's definitely not as powerful as the full-size recips, especially the 54V recip that I'm comparing it to right now. This 54V recip is definitely one of the most powerful recips on the market, But truthfully, using both of these recips, I actually preferred using the smaller 18 volt recip for this type of job. If you just want sheer power and to cut through stuff, the 54 volt recip's definitely the way to go. But having a recip in this location here, where I'm really worried about vibrating and cracking the corner of this render, I'm also worried about going off course and scraping the finished aluminium window, I honestly preferred using the smaller handheld 18 volt recip for this job. With that window sorted, the other issue we had was quite similar. We've got this door and window attached in one, and as we can see, the window jamb is doing the same thing and sticking past the wall. And this time it's not a case of trying to move the window back. The window is plumb and it does match up with the wall on both sides. What has happened is that this wall just hasn't been built square. The only good thing about this one though is that there is going to be cabinetry going hard up against this wall, hiding the inside of the architrave. So what we can do in this instance is just shoot our architrave on, flush with the jamb, and what I can do is go through and put some packets behind the architrave to hold it in place, and by the time the cabinetry is done, you're never going to be able to access or see the inside of this architrave. Alright, today we're jumping on a lockup and we've got a few interesting jobs to do. First thing we're going to be doing is building 2 fireplace walls in both units, and the best thing about this is that I've got access to DeWalt's framing gun for both of these fireplaces, so we can have a good look at the gun while building them. Another DeWalt tool we're going to use to build these is my DeWalt 360 Greenline laser level. I also need to point out that this DeWalt framer I'm using isn't mine. I used to have one, actually I used to have 2, I've gone through 2 of these DeWalt framers. Unfortunately one got stolen and one broke, but using it takes me back to some good days on the frames. I actually remember my first DeWalt framer that I had an issue where the nail was jamming. I couldn't figure out how to open it up and unjam the nail. And I remember doing a quick YouTube search, and I also noticed there was no video showing me how to do this. It was pretty quick and easy to figure out, so once I did figure out how to do it, that was the first ever YouTube video I made. I decided to do a video showing people how to unjam their gun in case anyone had the same problem as me and wanted to quickly figure out how to do it. I just checked and that was about 4 years and 1 month ago that I posted that first ever video. I had no intent, no idea of what this channel was going to grow into, and it's blown my mind, and I'm so thankful for anyone that's ever watched one of my videos and hit that subscribe button. So I'm pretty happy to use this gun. It's a great throwback, but there is a good reason we stopped using it. This was the first ever battery gun I used, and there was a stage where a lot of the people I worked with actually went out and started getting these DeWalt framers. They were fun to use, they could shoot nails really quickly, but there were too many issues with these guns that resulted in a lot of people not using them. Most people I know had their guns break down on them. Another issue these guns had is they had a horrible rafter hook. They would never sit on your belt properly. And what happened to me one day is I was climbing up a ladder, holding a beam on my shoulder, and the gun dropped off my tool belt. And that broke my DeWalt framer, and that was the last time I've used a DeWalt framer until today. With both those fireplaces framed out ready to go, we did a few other odd jobs around these units, such as going through the steel and just blocking them out for plaster. With that done, the last job we had to do between both units is install some blind helmets. This turned out to be a good job to do because it was another reason we got to use the DeWalt fixer. Before we could start installing the MDF for the blind helmets, we had to go through, knock out the roofs, and also pack it down 20mm so that the MDF can be installed below the bolts attached to those steel beams. Doing a job like this is a prime example of where this DeWalt fixer is perfect. We don't need it for too long, we don't need to shoot too many nails, and it's really not worth going out, setting up the compressor, running an extension lead to the compressor, running out the air hose, and then using the pneumatic gun. This is where I think the battery guns come into play, where you're just doing odd small jobs here and there, and it just saves you so much time getting everything else set up. Alright, second last day of the week, and we're starting a brand new frame today. It's going to be a prefab, so the goal today is to get all the walls up, plumbed and braced. And I also didn't expect this to happen, but we're not going to be at this job tomorrow. We're going to be at a new frame tomorrow as well, meaning that for all 5 days we ended up heading to different jobs and got a large variety of work done while testing these tools. The way I'm running this prefab today is I just went through, flicked out all of the external walls, we squared them all up, made sure they're parallel, had a few issues with the slab, but it's all sweet. We've worked out the walls for now, and we're just going to start bringing in walls and standing up walls. Since the internal walls aren't flicked, it's going to be a bit back and forth, where I'm going to go in between standing walls, flicking out the internals, and also going behind the boys and trying to plumb up some of these walls as we go. Since we do want everything stood, plumbed and braced today, it's going to be good if we get one section of the walls plumbed so that someone can start on the coil gun and start tying off these walls as we go. Apart from a bit of a muck around in the morning trying to work out what was going on with the slab and why it wasn't lining up with the walls, we had a really good day today. But unfortunately for the video, what we had to do today didn't allow us to use too many DeWalt tools. And on top of it, I didn't have access to the DeWalt framer, so for all the walls we were using Pazzods and the AEG gun to shoot everything together. For the final day of this week, we're going to be jumping onto a frame that I've been working on, and I think it's going to be a good job for testing a few more DeWalt tools. The very first thing that we're going to be doing is attaching the frame to the steel, and that means we're going to be using the DeWalt drill and the driver to get some bugle screws through the frame into the steel. When I did do that unboxing video and I got the DeWalt 10-piece combo kit, the drill and the driver are nowhere near as good as the two I got when I unboxed the $6,500 worth of DeWalt tools. So firstly, I'm going to try using that cheaper, less powerful drill and driver, and they still work, they still get the job done, but jumping across to the more superior models feels like a breeze. It is a really good insight that even when you are using a good name brand, it doesn't mean a lot unless you're using some of the best tools that they do have to offer. Now this is our third day on this frame, and I've actually been doing a bit of filming on this frame, which is hopefully going to come out in a later video. The video I'm wanting to make is showing the process of framing a house from the start to the finish, and I want to take the camera with me all day, every day, show everything we do, share as many tips and tricks that is involved in framing a house. And because I'm doing that, I don't really want to double up and show you guys the same things, but we'll still quickly go over what we are doing today. Right now we are at the point where we are setting up the laser level, and we're going to use this to find our highest wall plate and then work out what height we want to pack all our posies and beams to make sure that subfloor upstairs is going to be level. With the laser set up, we are going to use it to set some of our beams in place, and with the beams done, we even have time to go through and start throwing up some of the posies. We want to get this front area of posies done because we do have a load of flooring for upstairs, which is coming first thing Monday, and the last thing I want is to rock up to work on a Monday morning and be stressing and rushing to get that sorted.